Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, March 17th. Derek Van Riper here with a special guest. We got Eno Saris flying home from Arizona after a long week of coverage, covering Cactus League teams. James Anderson of RotoWire is here, lead prospect analyst, one of the hosts on the great RotoWire baseball podcast. James, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, DVR. It was great seeing you in person not too long ago, and good to be on the show again.
That's right. We had a retirement party for a coworker, which made me feel really old because I've been to retirement parties for, like my parents or their friends and people of that generation, but never anybody I'd actually worked with before. So shout out to Herb Ilk, the CTO, one of the founders of RotoWire, big part of the RotoWire story. Doesn't get talked about a lot because he likes it that way. He's retired now, so good for Herb. Lots of ground to cover with you today, though. We got some news and notes we'll start the show off with. I actually gathered a lot of questions from our Discord because I figured, hey, I can talk to James and ask James questions anytime I want. But what do the listeners want? What do people really want to know? And it's a lot of questions about under-the-radar hitters, a few specific guys, under-the-radar pitchers. So we're going to focus a lot on that over the course of this show. Quick reminder, we do have a live show, 2 live shows coming up next week in San Francisco at Bear Bottle Brewing Company, the Bernal Heights location, March 27th and March 28th, 4:30 start time on both days. No tickets required. Just show up, have a good time. We'll be there on opening day watching games before we record. They've got beer, they've got coffee, they've got kombucha. There should be a food truck, lots of good stuff there. So we're really excited to see you live in just over 1 week in San Francisco. All right, James, let's get started with some news. Mookie Betts will not play in the Japan series. 2 games, of course, Dodgers and Cubs. That gets underway early Tuesday morning. He's been dealing with some fatigue ever since landing in Japan. Dave Roberts saying they might send him back home. I don't know if there's anything actionable here, given that there's still another week plus before the Dodgers will play after this 2-game series. Just a little bit disappointing. We won't get to see him in the first couple games of the season. But I started thinking about the Dodgers depth chart more because they previously sent Haesung Kim down to AAA. And thinking about how the pieces all work here, I'm wondering if you look at this depth chart and you see a better path for Andy Pages today than we may have seen, 2 or 3 weeks ago when it looked like Kim might have been a fixture for them at second base, especially after that Gavin Lux trade.
Yeah, I had been kind of buying the dip on Pages after the Kim signing, just because I think people initially were maybe overrating what Kim's role was going to be with the Dodgers. I don't think they were that shy about saying he was going to be, kind of a utility player. And I think just the quality of Kim's defense, it made it clear to me when we kind of saw that, like what the Dodgers saw in him, because I just really didn't see much to get excited about offensively with Kim. And so he just seems like he's going to be more of kind of a bit player. And what Pages did last year, I thought was really encouraging. And especially the fact that he's a value add defensively. He just didn't seem like a piece or a potential value add defensively in right field. He just didn't seem like a piece that they were going to risk stagnating the development of. And so you look at the power that Pages was able to get to kind of throughout his minor league career. He always kind of walked that fine line of like the Rhys Hoskins, Mike Trout, like pushing the fly ball rate up over 50%. But then for him to manage the strike zone the way he did last year as a 23-year-old after some missed time, I think he's potentially poised for a breakout because there's much more power than he showed last year.
Yeah, and you look back at the minor league numbers, Pages ran a lot of 380, 390 OBPs coming up in that system. I mean, just a really well-rounded player. You're right about the defense. I like him a lot more in right than I do in center, but like being able to play center at least keeps you on the roster and in the lineup too. So a lot to like in that profile. And if I had like one core thing that I've been spouting for the last 3+ seasons now is that when I look at projections, the public-facing sets over at Fangraphs, the thing that I look for that creates the biggest value opportunity are discrepancies in plate appearances, right? If we see something in those numbers that we disagree with, like considering them people that use those projections and try to massage them on their own or just run them through something like the auction calculator, you're going to find that guys like Pages can get buried. Unless you run zips through the auction calculator, which is the only system that has them, I think, above even 350 plate appearances, you're going to see him as like a $2 player, even in a deep league. He's going to be completely buried And what do you think the actual playing time outlook looks like? I mean, do you think 450 is actually still in range for Andy Pages this year, given the age of this depth chart? And well, I mean, Mookie was hurt last year, was a fluky injury for him. But I look at that group and I'm like, it's the only downside I see of building rosters the way the Dodgers do with super high-end free agents on those longer-term deals is they might be more likely to break, but that is good for the younger glue guys like Pages in this case.
Yeah, I think it's very dangerous and challenging when we start trying to throw out like specific plate appearance projections for a guy like Pages, because it's more kind of like what is the range. I think you wouldn't responsibly project him for 550 or even 500 plate appearances, but I could see a scenario where Pages gets up over 500 plate appearances. But there's also, if he is just kind of okay and isn't really a viable option in center field, he maybe gets less than 400 plate appearances. So it's kind of what spot are you at in the draft? Is he your fifth outfielder, but there's some less exciting outfielders still available that you could get to kind of backfill in case you need to start the year with Pages on your bench? Like that's kind of where I want to have him, not in a spot where I absolutely need him to be playing every day, but just as one of maybe a couple outfielders where I'm trying to hit on one of those guys.
Yeah, I think leagues with deeper benches, he fits really well because there will be stretches where he just plays a little bit more. And like the path to 400 plate appearances or 350 or 550 or whatever number it ends up being, it's not necessarily linear. There might be stretches where in 12-team leagues, Andy Pages is a streamer and he's picked up and he's used. And there's going to be stretches where he's an obvious sort of cut because the playing time dries up, everybody's healthy, or something's not going well for him at the plate. So I do think that's sort of important too, the shape of the playing time. Let's move on to another story. This one is like predictable and frustrating at the same time. Royce Lewis is going to begin the season on the IL. It's another soft tissue injury. It's a hamstring yet again. First question is just about Lewis. Like, what are we doing with him in keeper and dynasty formats? How do you value a guy like this in long-term leagues? He's still relatively young, still 25. He's got the 2 ACL tears plus the other leg problems that have just been a problem throughout his entire professional career now. It seems like extreme Troy Tulowitzki downside health without even the chance to stay healthy for a full big league season yet.
Yeah, just really, really sad. And you could kind of just see like Lewis's reaction as he was suffering the injury running to first base, and his head just kind of like you could sort of see his mind working and just the extreme disappointment and frustration. And yeah, I just think, in dynasty, I'm not touching him if I don't have him. And if I have him, I'm probably just going to ride it out. Like, I don't really want to spend time in my day trying to find the right Royce Lewis trade, and I think you're better in these types of scenarios getting, a few weeks at least removed from the injury before you even consider, trying to sell low on a guy. So, I do not think this is a buy low opportunity. I didn't think it was a buy low opportunity already, like before the injury happened. So I think you got to just assume the worst with Royce Lewis at this point. That's what the history tells us. Yeah,
and I think it is a really sad story the way it's playing out so far. It's unusual for me to be interested in a player, have injuries slow them down for half a season or most of a season, have the price drop 60, 75 picks and ADP from the previous season, and for me to say, nope, still not in. I mean, I still like the skills, but the health grade is just an F. There's no way around that. And so many leagues we play in over at the NFBC have no IL spots, so you can't even stash him that way. It comes with that extra penalty of making everything else more difficult. So he's been a void for me all draft season. I think you're right. In the long-term leagues, you'd want to wait before even trying to do anything on the trade front with Lewis. Now, the related question here is who picks up the playing time this time around? Looking at that Twins depth chart, it seemed like Willie Castro was sort of inching towards being the primary option at second. There are a few moving parts there. It looks like Brooks Lee maybe could play some more. Is there anybody that you like in the absence of Lewis who could emerge to be at least useful in deeper leagues for us?
Yeah, it's kind of frustrating because I think Lee was kind of emerging to be someone that was going to be useful even with a healthy Lewis. I think Lee was going to see enough time at second base over Edouard Julien. But now with the injury, you can draft Lee with confidence, I think, at least in the playing time. It is a little frustrating that he's just not really a threat on the bases for a middle infielder. But I think Lee is just going to get as much playing time as he can handle. And Willie Castro, I think he might, he led the Twins in plate appearances last year, of all people. I think he might be able to do it again just based on the fact that he can play everywhere. And the Twins just have a bunch of these guys that are going to miss time throughout the season.
Yeah, that was something that surprised us in our Twins preview a few weeks ago. We were just looking at the projections, and we always try to identify the 5 guys that have to play every day or should play every day because you can't platoon everywhere. And Willie Castro was once again projected to be that leader. And you're like, well, yeah, he's going to play even when everybody's not hurt. And then when someone gets hurt, he's the first guy to move to a more difficult spot defensively based on how they're built right now. And with like 3 chronically injured guys in the core between Lewis, Correa, and Buxton, that playing time was really safe. But I think that's beginning to happen now with Brooks Lee. As long as he hits enough, he'll keep that opportunity. Is he mostly like a 15-team league guy, though, in 2025? I mean, you mentioned the lack of speed. Like, there's still some questions about the quality of the contact, but I tend to believe that he's polished enough in terms of his eye at the plate where he's at least going to hold his own and keep the job, even if he's buried in the bottom third of that order for a good chunk of the year.
Yeah, I think he's going to eventually just settle in as like a 20 homer infielder that hits, 255, 260, solid OBP. But I don't think you want to waste a spot on a guy who's working towards that outcome in your shallower leagues. So yeah, not the type of upside I would want to go for there. And even in like the 15-team leagues, I feel good about the playing time, but I might still go for like a Brian Rocchio, just because I think there's 15 steals in the bank there. And I think with both guys, it's not clear what type of power you're getting or what type of batting average you're getting.
Yeah, you're right about Rocchio's speed. He's a little bit undervalued, I think, right now for deeper leagues. Reminds me a lot of Geraldo Perdomo from a couple of seasons ago, where it's everyday playing time at a position of need, a good enough defender to keep that role. And those guys tend to just rack up numbers in the end, and it works out. Twins also announced that Chris Paddack and Simeon Woods-Richardson are going to be in the rotation. Zebby Matthews, David Festa, option to AAA. Real quick one for you on Paddack. Over under 1 month on his time as a starter for the Twins in 2025.
Under, yeah. Easy.
They got to be done with this, right? This is 3 or 4 bad starts away from one of Matthews or Festa getting that chance, and then Chris Paddack reliever being the plan going forward. One more injury for the Yankees. Man, they are having a brutal spring so far. Clarke Schmidt, we got an update since I first put this on the rundown. He's at least expected to be ready for his first regular season start. And I looked at their schedule, and there's a little bit of schedule working in his favor, I think, here. He was scratched from his start on Monday with shoulder soreness. The quotes are saying that he's not bouncing back from his spring outings as they'd hoped, which is pretty ominous. He did throw a 24-pitch bullpen session instead of that start on Monday. So you start to think about the math on this, and the Yankees open with the Brewers on opening day on Thursday. They have a rain day built in on Friday, so they're off Friday. They play again Saturday, Sunday, and they're off again Monday. So they won't need a 4th starter until April 4th against the Pirates. I think if they're willing to just use Stroman as their 3, as far as how they order everybody, go Fried, Rodon, Stroman, then they can get Schmidt stretched out enough where it's not like a 60-pitch first start. It could be 75 or 80 and mostly normal as long as this shoulder doesn't keep barking. But you get beyond that. We talked about Will Warren and Carlos Carrasco last week. This Yankees team is getting woefully thin really quickly on the pitching side.
Yeah, this kind of seems like it's maybe trending towards like year from hell status for the Yankees. And I was talking with Tristan Cockcroft last week on XM, and he's a Yankees fan, and he was even sort of saying like he didn't really like the idea of taking Judge top 3 this year because he thinks there's a chance the lineup falls apart without Soto. And now you're dipping into the Carlos Carrasco. We're not even in April, and we're already talking about Carlos Carrasco as an option for them. So it's just it's a scary situation. I'm kind of worried about any other Yankees that I have shares of. I'm a supporter of Will Warren getting a shot like this. and I'd rather roster him than Carrasco or Stroman. But like I also think there's a little bit of risk with a guy like Max Fried, who's dealt with IL stints due to forearm issues each of the last 2 years and just signed a huge deal with the Yankees. So it's everything that can go wrong is going wrong right now for them. I'm fine with Warren as like a strikeout flyer in deep leagues, but I wouldn't want to use Carrasco or Stroman anywhere.
Yeah, really low strikeout rates for both Carrasco and Stroman. And for Stroman, the swing strike rate dipped really low last year too. So it just doesn't seem like he's even the guy he was 2 or 3 years ago, where you could at least stream him. Plus the park is a tough place to stream in general, but a very difficult spring so far for the Yankees. Let's shift the focus over to some of the mailbag questions we got for today's episode. There were many of them. Thanks to you, all of you, for sending these in. First one's from BRG0008. How do you balance ceiling versus proximity in your top 100 as you put that list together? I mean, you got upside for guys like Walcott and Jesus Mate, and then you got to deal with older guys that have been knocking around at AAA. Jonathan Rodriguez was mentioned in the question, outfielder for the Guardians. So, what's your overall approach? Like, how do you get that right, or try to get that right, when you're dealing with players at different levels with clearly different ranges of outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the best is when you get upside and proximity, but you run out of those guys fairly quickly. And so, like in the case of Jonathan Rodriguez, I've got him just inside my top 100, I believe, or right around there, just outside my top 100. I think he actually has upside and proximity, at least in the power department. I mean, I don't think Rodriguez is going to hit for a high batting average per se, but I don't think he's going to kill you necessarily. I think it could be kind of a Matt Wallner type of deal with Jonathan Rodriguez. So like with him, I see some upside. Like a Jacob Wilson is maybe even like a better example, where like I don't really see any upside with Jacob Wilson, but he's ready. He's going to be playing every day. So you got to rank him somewhere. I've got him like in the mid 100s. So it's, you're still chasing upside. I do think a lot of times the more underrated prospects are those close to the majors guys who aren't ranked highly, but actually have interesting tools. Like in past years, like a Parker Meadows or a Matt Wallner. Like Caleb Durbin to me fits that bill this year, where you're not going to see Caleb Durbin ranked very high on like Baseball America or Pipeline or wherever you're looking at your sort of public lists. But Caleb Durbin has very relevant fantasy tools, and I think he has opportunity. So you're always looking for upside. Sometimes you have to look for upside in a package that might not seem like it's coming with a ton of upside, like a 24, 25-year-old outfielder at AAA. Typically, that's not your high upside prospect, but teams do still turn to those guys, right? And sometimes those guys have been working on things for years, and something finally clicks. So looking for upside everywhere, far from the majors, close to the majors, and like a guy like Jonathan Rodriguez, I think he's a little bit of both, proximity and upside.
Yeah, I threw Rodriguez's name in there as a sleeper on our AL Central team previews, because they're looking for power in every corner. The Guardians, I didn't love the Josh Naylor trade for them, not because Josh Naylor is this impossible to replace player in general, but for them. It's like, look, you go out and sign Carlos Santana like the same day, or basically announce those moves at the same time. I think you're giving up immediate power. You're taking on that downside. You're sort of like partially blocking Kyle Manzardo, even though you've got the DH spot. So you can have Manzardo and Santana in there together. And it's like you just can't, as an organization, you can't seem to develop nearly enough power bats. And by making first base and DH more crowded, you're taking away the possibility of both John Kenzie Noel and Jonathan Rodriguez being in the lineup together, because you're not really going to fit both of those guys in that outfield with Kwan and Thomas there, right? So I felt like that was just an annoying decision. I don't know if that reveals something about the Guardians process, or maybe if we're collectively higher on Kyle Manzardo than they are, or undervaluing Carlos Santana's veteran leadership and defense, or what exactly it is. But they continue to be a team that, like, the way they handle position players is both confusing and frustrating to me.
Yeah, I think they were probably just scared of holding Naylor too long. Like they're so cheap, they're not gonna. It's not like they were gonna extend Naylor or something, right? So, like he's such a weirdo in terms of his body type. You don't see guys that look like him age well into their 30s. Like it almost never happens. It's usually like a late 20s peak, and then they kind of fall off a cliff. So I'm guessing that they just didn't want to get stuck holding Josh Naylor when he started showing signs of decline. And I'm sure they also really liked Slade Ciccone, who they got in that deal. He's just a very Guardians-y type of pitcher. But I agree with your overall point, though, because you're really kind of limiting who can break through as an everyday player for you among your young players when you bring in the Santana and you already have Manzardo there. So I love John Kenzie Noel and I love Jonathan Rodriguez, but I am aware of the fact that they both probably can't break out in the same year.
Yeah, there's an outcome where neither of them is good enough to play in the big leagues consistently. Like that could happen too. Maybe they're playing a little bit of defense against that, but I just wish they could see the ceiling a little bit more, see the ceiling my way at least, and give those guys the opportunity. I look at Noel especially, I'm like, what's this guy going to learn going back to AAA? He's already played 203 games at Columbus. Like there's nothing AAA pitchers can do to John Kenzie Noel that will help him get better against big league pitchers. So maybe his playing time's pretty safe, and we're gonna have to wait a little longer than I'd like on Rodriguez. But yeah, you're looking for cheap power. I think either one of those guys are capable of providing it. I think I really want to hone in on something you were saying, referring to players like Parker Meadows, or even this year like a Caleb Durbin type, as guys that don't necessarily pop on prospect lists, but they find their way into a role that's just important for their team. And Meadows being a center fielder, I think that's sort of a key hack, or even just being able to play any position well defensively. Over the time I've played fantasy baseball, I think analyzing defense has become a bigger part of the job because it's so important in forecasting playing time. And as I mentioned earlier, that's where I think there could still be at least a small edge if you can do it better than other folks. One of the questions we had came from Grant, one of our longtime listeners. And it was kind of like the second part of the first question, where it was like, who could make a surprisingly large impact in 2025? As it turns out, I think one of the last times we had you on a couple of years ago, you pointed Grant to Michael Harris, ahead of Harris debuting younger than expected in Atlanta. And he had an immediate impact. He's been a great player on a per plate appearance basis ever since getting to the big leagues really quickly. So basically, Grant wants you to try to pull that off again and give him another Michael Harris if possible. But I think that's the general theme of what everybody's looking for this time of year. The guys that will either get to the big leagues faster than expected and hold their own, or guys that will have a massive leap skills-wise that haven't really shown us a lot of evidence that that's coming just yet.
Yeah, so I actually came up with this name before you went in and threw in some notes there, and I think we kind of started with the same guy, Luke Kershaw of the Twins. You to answer this question, it doesn't really help for me to say Sebastian Walcott, right? Because he's my number one ranked prospect. I think he's very underrated by the industry, but you can't go trade for Sebastian Walcott at any sort of a reasonable price, because whoever has him probably agrees with me and thinks he's great. But Kershaw, I think you could see him ranked anywhere on lists. I don't know where he's ranked by on the big top 100s and stuff. I assume he's on all of them, but I'm sure he's kind of all over the place. And he just isn't sort of a buzzy name. I think the stats are fantastic. It's really hard to find any real flaw in his game statistically as a hitter. And he's also going to run quite a bit. I just think he kind of fits our game perfectly. And he reminds me a lot of a Matt Shaw from what I would expect him to do production wise. And I think he actually kind of compares favorably to Travis Bazzana, the number one pick from last year's draft as a second baseman for fantasy. So Luke Kershaw, I think the price and the sort of upside and floor seem to kind of align for me with him, where I think he's probably a pretty good buy right now.
Do you think there's generally a point on the list right now? Keith Law a month or so ago was on the show, and he just said it was harder than ever for him to round out his top 100. I think he's got Kershaw at 62 on that list, by the way. So he's in, and he thinks that the bat will even play if he has to move to left field, which is pretty high praise I think in the scouting world for anybody's bat. If it plays in left field, that's good. I just wonder, like, are we looking? Can we like find players beyond the top 40 or top 50 even that will have that kind of impact? Because I try to remember, like, where do you remember where Parker Meadows was ranking on your list before he broke through? Did he creep up into at least the back half of the top 100?
Well, yeah, there's the great feature where I can
Chart.
look that up for any player, and I'm doing that right now. So Meadows didn't get up into the top 100 for me until like the end of 2023, and then he got up he was in the top 50 from basically October 2023 till he graduated.
That's right. Yeah, the chart is there. Even if it's not showing up automatically, you can click on it and it actually shows up. So yeah, so you can find these players even outside the top 25, top 50 range. They exist there. With Keishel too, it's like, if the Twins have that banged up core that we were talking about earlier, and they need to find a way to make good on a really disappointing 2024, and they're doing it on a tight budget. This is a team that's been very quiet. Aaron Gleeman's written about this ever since they added Carlos Correa. They have done very little as far as adding payroll. They've tried a few things that were smaller moves, and they had that massive fade last season. I could see a world where it's not just Keishel getting the chance too. Emmanuel Rodriguez could play in the big leagues this year. Mm-hmm. Could Walker Jenkins play in the big leagues as maybe like a late August, kind of like the Gunnar Henderson, Corbin Carroll timeline we saw a couple of years ago? Is that actually in play, or maybe all three of these guys are in the lineup together before this season is over?
I do think that's in play. They have a lot of outfielders. Emmanuel Rodriguez is really, unfortunately, kind of trending towards being one of these guys that we just sort of have to mention the injury history with. He's kind of always missing time. I think he would have debuted already, actually, in the majors if he had just kind of had a normal injury history as a prospect. So definitely tracking Emmanuel Rodriguez's durability this year. But if he's just healthy, like if he gets over this and doesn't re-injure anything, I do think we see Emmanuel Rodriguez this summer. I think he's on the 40-man too. And then Walker Jenkins, he's definitely trending as sort of, could finish the year as the number one overall prospect, could, come up late August is now the time when teams can promote guys and just keep them up and not play them so much that they exhaust their prospect eligibility. So that could happen with Jenkins. And then, Keishel, I think he probably is up this summer, like as early as maybe June. Like they're really high on him. I think Brandon Warren, who covers the Twins, mentioned to me that that's basically Keishel's spot at second base. Like once he's ready, if it's Brooksley, if it's Edward Julian, if it's Willie Castro, they're going to move somewhere else, and Keishel will be the second baseman. So there is a scenario where all three of those guys are up. But I don't think they want to kind of kick someone like Trevor Larnach to the side or Matt Wallner to the side either. So could be a challenge to make all the pieces fit there. But so that would be the thing, that like all three of them playing at the same time. I don't know if there are enough injuries that could make that happen, but I think they're all in play to be up this year.
And maybe it's more of this season didn't go well, they're sellers the deadline, and then there's just more roster spots available, and that's the way they all get up there together too. It might be hard for a contending Twins team to make that trifecta happen all at once. What do you think about Colby Thomas? I think Eno and I have kicked that name around a couple of times, and Max Muncy came up. I think last week we were asked about the A's third base situation, which is a lot worse than I had realized with Gio Urshela and Luis Urias playing there. But do you see Colby Thomas as someone that could be a steady contributor in year one? I mean, it's an extreme fly ball sort of approach, maybe a little bit of excess swing and miss, especially against top level pitching. But does this actually look like a profile you would try to stash away in a 15-team league if you thought he was going to get an early season look?
So since my last update, I updated it January 15th, my top 400 rankings. I feel like I've gotten a little bit lower on Thomas and a little bit higher on Muncy. And so I think Thomas was kind of borderline top 50. Muncy was borderline top 100. I think Muncy is clearly a top 100 guy to me now. And then the only issue with Thomas is, I think Nick Kurtz is kind of forcing the issue a bit sooner than expected. Their first round pick from last year's draft, first baseman, gets Jim Thome comps. And so if Nick Kurtz is up, let's say he's up in like beginning of June, and then they move Tyler Soderstrom to DH a good chunk, and they find a way to move Brent Rooker to the outfield, then all of a sudden that's Colby Thomas's spot. Maybe they don't find room for all three of those basically DH first base types, and they have to keep DHing Rooker, and maybe Soderstrom loses out, or maybe Kurtz doesn't come up. But as I'm sort of envisioning Nick Kurtz making his push to the big leagues, I think that kind of could take a spot away from Colby Thomas, even though they don't play the same position, because I think either way, they're both trying to replace Seth Brown on the roster.
Yeah, there's like three people that we're trying to cram into Seth Brown's roster spot right now. And I think it speaks to the A's maybe hitting on a couple of things that maybe weren't in place a year ago. I mean, Kurtz, they just drafted, of course, but Thomas's development has gone really well. Muncie's development's gone really well. And I think this time last year, I was very critical of the fallout from some of the big trades they had made. It hadn't been a window where the same front office has been in place for a long time was trading away the likes of Sean Murphy and Matt Chapman. You looked at the fruit of those kinds of trades, you're like, this is not a good return. They got quantity, but they didn't get big leaguers. They didn't even get like part-time big leaguers. Now they're starting to at least connect on some draft picks and find a good mix of guys that can be impact players. So you add that to a few development success stories, and suddenly things do look a lot better on this roster. And and I were talking about Soderstrom's bat, and he was pretty quietly a lot better last year. I mean, underlying numbers, the quality of the contact are really good. Do you see an ability to sustain what he was doing in 2024 over a full season's worth of plate appearances? Is that actually a true talent sort of breakout from Tyler Soderstrom that we just saw? And is this also a bat that just plays somewhere, even if Nick Kurtz bumps him off of first base?
Yeah, I buy it. And it's the strikeout rate is what was really surprising. Because like obviously he was more productive as the season went on at AAA, but I think it was like a strikeout rate under 20% over his last like 150 plate appearances or so, which is out of character for Soderstrom. And it's not like he was a guy who was like 24, 25, spending another year at AAA. Like he was just 22, and he's only got 100 games at AAA under his belt, or 110 games. So it's not like he's a quad A guy. And so for him to get that strikeout rate to where he did, I mean, we know the power's there. Yeah, I love Soderstrom. It's just about making the pieces fit. I hope that the whole, still playing him at catcher thing, I hope that doesn't cut into his offense, because, maybe that was part of why he was able to take off, is because he was playing so much first base. But yeah, I think the bat is definitely good enough to play every day for Soderstrom. They just have to find a place for him.
I had a few other names I jotted down for today's show, and you can let me know if any of these guys are interesting to you. I have this developing minor conspiracy theory that Cole Young is going to debut for the Mariners this year. I think they need to start moving guys that are in that infield mix up just to get a feel for how the pieces will eventually fit as some of the more talented younger guys get there in the years ahead. And also think because they went so cheap this winter, there's going to be some internal pressure on that front office to find some kind of success story in that group of position players.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with how they're going to push Cole Young. And I actually had if I hadn't gone with Luke Keeschel for my answer, I had a different Mariner infielder that I was going to throw out, and that's Michael Arroyo. But I do think Cole Young is definitely ahead of Arroyo and a much better defender. So I think we see him first. Arroyo just as a guy who's like a top 50 prospect who maybe isn't valued like that other places. Power, speed, hate the ballpark. But my comp on Cole Young for a while has just been Bryson Stott, but with a worse park. And like, I think that's exactly what he's going to be. It's not going to be that exciting in fantasy, like from just where are you drafting him? But if you have him in Dynasty, you'll be able to use him for a decade, and it'll be very productive, just not like a star middle infielder. But yeah, Michael Arroyo was another name I was going to throw out as just sort of a a guy to buy this offseason.
Yeah, I think it's just sort of getting out in front of Cole Emerson and Felny and Celestin eventually being a part of that mix too. Just figure out, where do I want to play these guys, and can they all hit enough to play together in the long run? I think that's the question that Jerry Dipoto and company are going to have to answer. Going further down the list, I flagged a couple of names. You can throw anybody into the conversation you want. I was trying to answer the bad depth charts part of the questions that came in. I thought Jared Serna in Miami was kind of interesting because, like, I mean, there's power, there's speed. Like, who knows? Like, they're so bad, anything's possible in that position player group. Alan Roden's become a little bit of a bit on the show just because he just looks like he's going to hit, man. Like, he's interesting. Eno was shocked when I said his name. Like, who's that? So I felt good. I stumped Eno completely. And then a guy that I think you liked at one point in time, because he wouldn't be on my radar if you didn't write about him or have him ranked somewhere, Tirso Ornelas in San Diego, man. Like, I'm kind of intrigued. Like, I think there's a chance that he ends up playing a lot. Maybe it's more backloaded toward the second half, but do you have anybody outside the top 100 where the depth chart is so soft that you feel like the door's wide open for something good to happen for somebody?
Did you talk about Serna at all with Eno? Because when we're doing our Devil's Rejects draft, like, I'm always keeping the queue populated with like prospects I want us to consider. And at one point in the draft, Eno was like, I like Serna, let's take him. And so we took Jared Serna. And I agree with you. They targeted him in that trade. Like, I think they view him as a future everyday player for them. And, he kind of gives me like Luis Arias type of vibes, just as sort of a smaller, second base probably, although they might try to shoot him in at shortstop. But you wonder if he's going to make quite enough impact to be interesting in fantasy. But I think the strikeouts are, he's got that in check and wasn't old for the levels or anything like that. So I dig the Serna call out. The Alan Roden one, like, he's, my ears perked up as soon as he kind of got name dropped right away at the beginning of spring training by the GM. Like, that's pretty rare. And Roden, when you have that from like a guy that's all statistics and like not many people are writing about him, like true scouts are writing about Roden, when you have the GM go out and name drop him, then it's like, oh, great. Like, so these stats might actually mean something. I had a couple names that, and with Ornelas, he's been around for so long. It's crazy that he's still like 23 or 24, whatever he is. But yeah, I think the opportunity is there for him. I had a couple guys that I just wanted to throw out that they are in my top 100. Like, you were talking about how Keith Law is having a hard time building out the top 100. Like, there's really not anyone I really like that's outside my top 100 unless they're just years and years away. But Sal Stewart of the Reds is a name I'll throw out, and then Ryan Clifford of the Mets. Two of my favorite hitting prospects in the game, and they're two guys that I just always end up with whenever I'm doing one of these industry prospect mock drafts or something like that. So I know I'm higher than pretty much everyone on Sal Stewart and Ryan Clifford. And I think they're both going to just tear the cover off the ball this year. And I think they already have kind of earned more respect than they've gotten. But I think this year is going to be huge for both Sal Stewart and Ryan Clifford.
Yeah, you're a little high on both, but I mean, I'm intrigued as well for those. Like, they look like they could be impact guys. And Stewart, I think, if you're worried about in-game power, like, the ballpark will eventually like scrub that too. So that's kind of like the extra little thing that I like about him, at least as long as he's in the Reds organization. A name that didn't just come up in our conversation is one we were asked about specifically. This question came from Tuesday in the Discord. What is Chandler Simpson's realistic ETA for the Rays? I think the question also mentioned doesn't believe that Johnny DeLuca is much of a roadblock.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think they want to see if Johnny DeLuca or Christopher Morel are roadblocks or not. And if they prove to not really be earning the playing time they're getting early in the season, then I think Simpson becomes a name. Like, I think, like, we could see Simpson back up in mid-April if they just think they're getting nothing out of one of those outfield spots, because at least with Simpson, they're getting that crazy weapon on the bases. And just putting the ball in play nonstop. So I really like Johnny DeLuca. Like, I think he is underrated by many. I think he has sort of like a 12 homer, 30 steal upside if you really squint. But he's going to have to just be better at the plate than he was over the full season last year. Obviously, they're not going to just keep playing him if he's getting on base at like a 295 clip and not hitting for much power. But I think they think DeLuca can break out. I think he can as well. But I don't think they're going to just be patient with DeLuca and Morel for months and months. Like, this is still a Rays team that has good enough talent on its overall roster to compete this year. So I think it could be really soon for Simpson if these guys are not performing, specifically DeLuca. You could go to a DeLuca Simpson platoon right away if you wanted to do that. So it's kind of going to come down to just how well DeLuca plays, I think, early this season. So I'm high on DeLuca. I think he's going to be fine, but if he's not, I think we'll see Simpson right away.
There's probably a world where you could have DeLuca and Simpson in the same outfield together too. Like, it's not impossible. So that'd be a case where Morel's not hitting, probably, if that plays out that way, which would be bad for me. I've got a lot of Christopher Morel. I just think he hits the ball hard enough. Like, the Rays have such a good track record of making tweaks with approaches. And I think with Morel, if I'm not mistaken, he crushes the pitches he should by Seager. He's elite in that regard. So there's something there with Christopher Morel, even if there's not really a defensive position. The other question with Simpson that comes in is, like, who is this guy as a player? I don't know if I've seen anyone quite like him, because the K rate's not usually this low. I mean, the Billy Hamilton roto comp would be the first place my mind goes, because, like, who else could run this much, play good defense in center field, and like, what could they do? Billy Hamilton struck out a lot more than Chandler Simpson has struck out as a minor league player. I think that alone sort of starts to break down the comp a little bit. And I just think, like, this era we're playing in right now is even better for a player like this. The free stolen bases for a guy that didn't need that sort of help, like, that sort of maxes out the possibilities of how much Chandler Simpson could impact a game.
Yeah, I don't think I've discussed anyone in sort of side text conversations more this offseason than Simpson. And if you go all the way back to the fall, all those conversations started with, well, how good of a defender is he? Because pretty much all the public, like Baseball America, Fangraphs, wherever, like, they were saying this is a fringe average defender in the outfield. He used to be a second baseman. And so I was texting with people like, how good is the defense? How good is the defense? Because if he's just a fringe average defender in center field, then none of this matters. They're not going to take the hit on power and defense. Mm-hmm. But then as we kept moving throughout the offseason, you had people reporting on, like, late season Simpson defense and saying that it was better than fringe average. And then he comes out this spring and he's making catches out there. So it does seem like he's gotten significantly better defensively in not that long of time, which is great. And I think he has to basically be, to me, he has to be a plus defensive outfielder for him to be playing regularly, given the complete lack of power you're going to get from him. But if we assume that he can be a plus defender out there, then I think all bets are off, just in terms of what he could put up at the plate. 100 steal seasons, I think, in play with him. But the question for fantasy, I think, is sort of, how do you value that player? Like, do you put him into your valuation formula as, 100 steals and a 300 average? I don't think you should do that, because you don't want to be using Chandler Simpson in your lineup for all 100 of those steals. You should almost put him in as, like, Chandler Simpson 30 steals and a good average. Because if I start him for more than 30 of those steals, he's going to tank my RBI and my power so much that it's going to end up costing me. So I think just knowing how to value him and knowing how to use him, knowing that he's not just a leave him in your lineup every single week, all season long type of guy. I think that's kind of how I'm considering him, assuming the defense has indeed come all the way around to the point where he can be a weapon out there.
And now I'm starting to think too, the problem is that the hype and the price is going to be based on the 100 steal season, and it's just going to be impossible to get him anyway. at a
Right.
usage appropriate sort of redraft price. So could be a fun player for me to watch that is never on my teams. It's also hard to build around players that are heavily balanced on two categories like that. I mean, the other downside, if you can't just leave him in your lineup all the time, if you're relying on Simpson for more than just even the 30 bags, if he gets hurt, you're chasing steals at a bunch of positions and you only got one spot in your lineup that you can fill when he gets hurt too. So I just find players like this to be a little bit challenging to work with in general. The most similar players, imbalanced players as a group. Let's move on to some pitching. Got basically the exact same question came in from Matt, looking for pitchers that could make an impact this year due to opportunity on the pitching side. I put a ton of names on the rundown, but open question for you. Who did you think about when this question was on the sheet?
Well, the whole idea of like under the radar pitchers this time of year, it's just that one throws me because it's just all I see on Twitter is just people trying to unearth stuff with all these pitchers. So they don't stay underrated for long if they are indeed underrated. Michael McCreevy is just a guy that I thought I'd mention. I've been fascinated by him all off season. I tried to get Eno to take him in Devil's Rejects. Eno wanted nothing to do with it, which I understand, but I just think McGreevy does not get enough credit for how many innings he logged last year. Just an insane amount of innings for a pitching prospect, 150 in the minors, 23 innings in the majors last year. So he threw more innings than most big league starters did last year, and he had a ground ball rate over 60% in the majors, had a walk rate below 7% at AAA and in the majors. And his slider, I think, is a plus pitch. So, I know that the fastball, especially last year, was a low velocity offering, but I love Michael McGreevy. I just don't think there are many guys that can do what he did from a strike throwing standpoint and an innings log standpoint. And he's just entering, now his age 24 season. So I'm really intrigued by what McGreevy can do with like a full year in the rotation.
So I'm guessing the reason Eno wasn't in is like the model likes the slider, but the model likes nothing else. It's probably like a 90 fastball, not 90 miles per hour, but like a 90 grade fastball. Right. I think there's something happening in pitching right now that it's been happening for a while, but I think we're finding people and places that are defining this better. It's having similar shapes and having like true deception. Like we're getting a better sense of what makes it hard for an opposing hitter to square up a pitcher. And it's not always the guys that have best stuff. It goes back into the multiple fastballs thing. Like you got a 4-seamer, a 2-seamer, and a cutter. Those all generally look pretty similar coming out of the pitcher's hand. Those late movements, you're kind of guessing a lot more. And then you end up having a wider arsenal because usually you pair that with at least one breaking ball and then a changeup or something. You get 5 pitches. And I think we're seeing deeper arsenal guys. Like something that was old is becoming new again. And I think because of pitch development and the advancements on that side, breakouts can come from so many places now. I mean, you and I, we were hosting the Farm Fridays on XM a few years ago. And I think at the time, it was like when Joey Lucchese was new. There was one of the episodes we were talking about a bunch of guys that had been promoted, and they all seemed pretty similar at the time. Like good minor league results, command first profiles. It was hard to discern. Like we had a question about like 3 or 4 different guys. And I think Bieber may have been part of this group too. He ended up being the best by far. But at the time we looked at it, we're like, well, there's not that much ceiling with anybody here. I think what's happening for me is my idea of what a pitcher's ceiling can be is changing. I'm just more open-minded about a report that says back-end starter, possible swingman. I can look at that and say, you know what? That's like the median outcome, but what if we get a better than median outcome? That happens. And I think it's more likely to happen now because there are different organizations and pitching labs that are out there that are just trying different things and maybe able to take the things a pitcher does well and really lean into those strengths more effectively than they have in the past. So I'm much less quick to dismiss a player based on the reported most likely outcome than I was a few years ago. Because we've seen enough guys come up with what looks like back-end stuff who become 2s and 3s, and or they just miss more bats than expected because the command is that good. And they just locate everything so well that opposing hitters are they're taking a lot of called strikes, and there's just different ways to get there.
Yeah, and one thing that's evolved with me throughout my years of doing this is like I just care so much about proximity with pitching prospects. Like Sean Burke is another guy. Like he just gets up to the White Sox last year, and they make him a better pitcher on the fly because their best coaches are at the big league level. Like that's kind of where I want to find stuff, is like who's knocking on the door of the big leagues or already has seen time in the big leagues and is going to help me right away, because it's such a trap in dynasty leagues to spend significant resources like buying these buzzy pitching prospects who are multiple years away from the big leagues, because so much can go wrong in that time. And there's these guys that are breaking out who are right on the footsteps of the majors, and they're 24, 25, 26, they're not that highly ranked, but like that's where the value is on the pitching prospect side of things. It's not rostering these, don't use your number 5 pick in your first year player draft on Chase Burns. Take a college bat and try to find your pitching prospect really, really cheap. Like that's kind of the way to approach it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's like try to find the next Spencer Schwellenbach. Like don't shoot for the top of the prospect list right away, because there's so much churn on that part of lists anyway, because of all the injuries and all the surprising leaps forward in development that it changes really quickly. I got a whole bunch of names. I'll just run through a few of my favorites. I think Braxton Ashcraft is pretty interesting because the Pirates actually have figured some things out on the pitching side. And I think everyone's really focused, and this is even the RotoWire outlook, I think too. Bubba Chandler and Thomas Harrington are very highly regarded, 2 guys that are ranked ahead of them. They're also upper level guys. The order in which those guys debut could actually be based more on who is on regular rest when the Pirates need a starter, more than it is on pure merit. That's just how close they all are. And I look at Ashcraft, great results by control, right? Low walk rates in the upper level, still plenty of swing and miss to go with it. I think Eric Longenhagen has a 70 grade on that slider. So he was actually a keeper in Devil's Rejects, one of the last guys we decided to keep this year. And it might take a little more patience because of Chandler and Harrington, but I think Braxton Ashcraft is pretty underrated.
Yeah, and the reason I might be underrating him is I'm kind of betting against the workload. I'm sort of fading Ashcraft's durability and ability to hold up as a big league starter, but I'm definitely not fading the skills. And that's one where I could be wrong on. And I think this is sort of his prove it year as a starter, 25 years old, going to open the year at AAA, and they're going to want to see, can you throw 100 innings for the first time? Can you maybe get up to 120 innings after throwing 73 last year? So I think if he can do that this year, that's huge. And all those skills you talked about will come to light, obviously. But he's been banged up for a while. Hasn't, last year was a season high in innings, 73. So that's the only reason he's not ranked higher on my top 400.
Yeah. So I'm looking for guys like that, guys that haven't done it yet, that have all the tools and just need time. The benefit of time could go a long way for someone like Ashcraft. I mean, the Brewers, it seems like just because, you and I we're in Wisconsin, we think about Brewers pitching a lot. I think they're in that group of organizations that get the benefit of the doubt. I see people throwing Logan Henderson on the bottom of deep league rosters. I even see some love for KC Hunt. And one common refrain we start to see and hear about Brewers pitching is that it's different. It's different. There's all sorts of, for lack of a better word, weirdos as far as guys that are in that organization that either have one really nasty pitch, or they have some funk, or there's just something about them that's not normal. And it goes into that, hey, weird is good. It's especially for pitchers, it's tough to hit something you don't see very often. So does Henderson or Hunt or anybody else in that organization sort of pop for you just because they don't fit the traditional scouting mold, but it actually works because of things that people aren't necessarily looking for?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Henderson, just because I don't really know what to make of him, man. He is such a weirdo, and I feel like it's I don't want to be a sucker that buys into what he's doing. but he's had just so much success. It's like, should I bet against everything I've learned about scouting tells me to bet against the 6-foot righty whose best pitch is his changeup, and doesn't really have a breaking ball.
Right. Doesn't seem to have a feel for spin, which the more I talk to people who know pitching, kind of seems like an essential ingredient for being a big league pitcher.
Yeah. And the right-handed part is huge too. Cause we've seen this kind of work with lefties much more often, but they just have really good command. They have a really good changeup. But yeah, Henderson, it's he's one of those guys where if you're rostering him, great, ride it out, see where it goes. I'm not enough of a believer to sort of acquire him right now or draft him in draft and holds, but I could see myself being wrong because it's the Brewers. And like you said, if it hasn't been done before, hitters haven't really seen it attempted to be done before. Right. So, yeah, he's one of the more interesting prospects in all of baseball to me.
And maybe it has a short shelf life. Maybe it works for a year or two, or maybe the teams in division that see him a little bit more often start to pick up on it and it becomes less effective. I'm open my mind to that possibility as one of the outcomes as well. A few other names. Miguel Ulola came up when I was doing Devil's Rejects prep with our buddy JH, and I got to check his status. And coming out of the weekend, he actually left Friday's spring breakout game with right shoulder discomfort. But it's another organization where I just kind of have some baseline trust that they either find big leaguers at a rate better than others, or they actually do well enough in development to just squeeze as much as they can out of guys. 30% K rates last year, mostly at AA. I think he made one appearance at AAA. It's a, can he improve the walk rate question enough to be a good big league starter question, I think, with Ulola.
Yeah, I think he's in the perfect organization, and he definitely is a great name to bring up here because I think I've got him probably ranked the highest of these guys. Maybe Noah Cameron might be higher, but yeah, Ulola's fastball, I'm a huge sucker for a big time fastball in the upper levels, and he definitely has that. And the Astros are one of those teams where so many times there's been a guy where it's just like, oh, he's probably going to end up in the bullpen, and they somehow turn him into a good starter for 3 or 4 years. So if any team can make Ulola effectively wild starter, I think it's Houston. And I think based on how they've pushed guys in the past, the shoulder thing probably slows that down a little bit, but I don't think he would have spent a ton of time in the minors this year if he came out throwing strikes this year. But yeah, the injury, I also hate buying injured pitchers. So that might lead to him falling a little bit on the update here later this week.
Yeah, we got to see what kind of update we actually get from the Astros in that case. But yeah, even Hunter Brown, look at Hunter Brown's walk rates in the minors, always higher than what he's done during his time in the big leagues. I started to speculate on this over the weekend. I started to say, are they letting pitchers do things in the minors and then taking it away, in pursuit of stuff? Are they saying, yeah, try to throw anything anywhere, and we don't really care what happens? It's the minor leagues. The results don't matter as much. We don't care if we win or lose. We want your stuff to be as nasty as possible. They bring you along. They get you in front of the big league staff and the big league coaches and big league catchers, and they say, okay, now we're going to simplify. Now we're going to do stuff, I don't know, like the Rays one target, or we're going to at least give you fewer options. And maybe that's what it is. That's where it comes back to having the scouting eye to understand, is it really a command problem, or is it a decision-making problem, or something in development that's causing them to struggle with control in the minors when there may actually not be as bad of a control problem as we think. And they've done it with a lot of different guys.
Yeah, I think that's a good theory. I mean, Arrighetti last year, Luis Garcia definitely fits the mold. Christian Javier, they've done it with more guys than any other team I can
Blanco, think. Valdez, I think, as a prospect, tons of. I didn't think Framber Valdez was going to make it as a big league starter. I thought it was going to be too many walks.
Yeah, Hunter Brown was by far the most critically acclaimed of those prospects, and even he wasn't like a guy that was, thought of as like a Jackson Jobe type, right? So the fact that they've taken 4 or 5 guys who I think on most public lists were maybe never top 100 prospects and turned them into mixed league, top 40, top 50 starters. I think you have to look at teams that have a track record of doing that and give someone like Olola a bit more benefit of the doubt than you would if they were in another org.
I know we're already at an hour, so I'll try to get us out the door here in a couple of minutes because we've got other places we got to get to, I'm sure. Chase McDermott is kind of interesting. He's coming off of a lat strain this spring. He nearly cracked your top 100 last summer. I was kind of looking at the prospect chart for him before we started recording. You think about the way things are unfolding for the Orioles. This is also sort of a big-time stuff, questionable control sort of profile, but if we assume any of the similar characteristics about Orioles pitching prospects that we were just discussing with the Astros as an organization, maybe there's actually a little bit of room for unexpected growth from McDermott once he gets that chance.
Yeah, I mean he's just so old that's why he's not that highly ranked for me right now. Like he's going to turn 27 during the season. This is a swing year for him, I think, in terms of is he a reliever, is he a starter? Behind Cade Povich, certainly once he gets healthy, but there's strikeout upside for sure with McDermott. One guy I wanted to throw out just before we go, Justin Robleski with the Dodgers. I think he was another guy I was trying to get to take, and he wouldn't bite on him just because he's SP 9 on the Dodgers depth chart or whatever. But I just think Robleski would be thought of, and Landon Knack certainly as well. These guys would be thought of as exciting arms that are ready to break camp if they were in other organizations. So part of the reason, you can go after injured pitchers, you can go after guys that like have weird stuff like Henderson. I think you could maybe go after Robleski just because he's so cheap, because people just don't think he's going to pitch anytime soon.
Yeah, I really felt that fall with Robleski, and yeah, Knack was very inexpensive in Devil's Rejects, and maybe you got to wait a month or two for the opportunity to come along, but you're going to feel good about using him in a league that deep if the injuries do bite again and create that opportunity for Knack with the Dodgers. 3 names I threw on the sheet for 2026, Grant Taylor in the White Sox organization, Nestor Herman in the Orioles organization. Limited workloads in college for Nestor Herman. Like if he does well at AA, I think he's going to jump up prospect list just because it's just go out there and prove it, I think, for him. And then Jaden Hom in the Tigers organization, who I know is starting to pop on a few lists. I think Keith had him pretty aggressively ranked, but the guy I wanted to ask you most about is just Grant Taylor, because I think this could be excellent stuff. And it could be another example where, because there are some very intriguing prospects closer to the big leagues that have been on the radar a little bit longer with Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith, I think there's a little bit of an opportunity here where Grant Taylor is just overlooked because of a couple names ahead of him on that organizational depth chart.
Yeah, I'm going to push him up my rankings a bit on the update this week. And he's tough because there's obvious durability issues in his past. But this is also the type of player, like there was a time when like Jesus Luzardo or Walker Buehler were at the same stage of their development and had similar dominant numbers in tiny samples. And so if you jumped in right away on those guys, you got them for a song, and they went on to become, number 1 pitching prospects in the game. So I think like Taylor has that type of stuff. He has that type of small sample track record of dominance where he's doing all the stuff we want, like throwing strikes, multiple plus pitches. So I think he's a great guy to go after this season, but I'm sure whoever's got Grant Taylor is excited about having Grant Taylor.
Yeah, you're probably not getting Grant Taylor as much more. Maybe you can get him as like a throw-in in certain leagues, but you're not like targeting him and like building a deal around him, because most people that have him know what's going on. They have him for a reason at this point. But I also think this year is going to be sort of a get right, maybe 80 to 100 innings sort of year. Next year, it's more like 130, 140. And then it's like 2027 before we're talking about Taylor as someone that can have more of a full-on starter's workload, but you're just kind of playing that long game. It's the somewhat inexpensive dart you can throw in a keeper dynasty league that can pay off if you don't want to go at the top of the board for pitching, like we suggested a little bit earlier. Just a quick reminder before we go, you can join our Discord with the link in the show description. James, where can our listeners find your work and hear your show?
Yeah, do the Prospect Podcast every Wednesday on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast channel, and then also rotowire.com/pod as I said, the top 400 prospect rankings will be fully updated by the end of this week. I'll probably be finishing those while I'm in Las Vegas, getting ready for my high stakes drafts, but I am hoping to get the prospect rankings done this week. So rotowire.com/pod. You can follow me on Twitter or Blue Sky at RealJRAnderson.
Must follow. Great prospect analyst, great friend of mine. And James, good luck to you in the NFBC drafts this weekend too. Enjoy Vegas.
Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
All right, we are going to head out for today. Eno returns on Tuesday. You can follow me on Blue Sky, dvr.bsky.social. If you don't have a subscription to The Athletic, theathletic.com/ratesandbarrels gets you in the door. But yeah, rotowire.com/pod. At least get a trial. Try RotoWire stuff out. They do great work over there. Spent a long time working there with James and the crew. So many tools that I use every single day. Well worth the price of a subscription. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. We're back with you on Tuesday.